Are you thinking that now might be the right time to start your own podcast? Could it be that you have more questions than answers as you consider what your next step might be? And what if you could launch your podcast fast and grow your podcast with ease? If these questions are what are keeping you up at night, here's some really great news, because this is exactly what we're going to talk about on today's Learn More, Earn More show. Hello. My name is Nancy Juetten. I'm a podcast guesting success expert and the leader of the Love Your Business, Love Your Life Inner Circle. And it's always a pleasure for me to bring guests to the show who can answer important questions viewers and listeners have that are beyond my own expertise as they build businesses and lives that they can love. Today, I am pleased to bring on Adam Hommey as my guest. Adam is a podcast hosting expert, and his Reach system helps experts create and launch a podcast to serve as a key networking, client attraction, and celebrity expert branding tool. He's a speaker, author, trainer, and consultant with nearly 20 years experience helping entrepreneurs win at the game of business and marketing so they can thrive from the intersection of brilliance and passion while making a difference in their communities, their markets, their audiences, and in their bank accounts. As the creator of the podcast Reach system, Adam helps clients create and launch a podcast as a key network client attraction and celebrity expert branding tool. He's the author of Groundhog Day is an Event, Not a Business Strategy, and a contributing author to Journeys to Success, the Millennial Edition, both international Amazon bestsellers. He's spoken on scores of podcasts and stages around the country and is a sought-after expert on topics related to launching your own podcast and hosting your podcast and more. He calls Las Vegas, known to some as the hottest city in America, his home, and has a variety of interests, which I'm sure we will get into as we start our conversation. So we're going to talk about why you might want to launch your podcast fast and grow your podcast with ease. Adam, welcome to the show.
Oh, couldn't be happier to be here. I am indeed in my sumptuous Las Vegas apartment here, sitting on my purple couch. Hey, never miss an opportunity to match your brand colors. Also, and this is a funny story, this couch only cost me $150 and it's really cozy. I have two podcast production assistants. They are domestic short hair black cats with very natural claws. So I have long since resigned myself to the fact that anything I own is their toy, and it'll need to be replaced within a year. So when they wanted to sell me a payment protection plan on this one, I said, the payment is going to be, I'm going to call you up in a year and have you ship me another one.
That's funny. Well, so as I've already demonstrated, I'm a podcast hosting expert. I'm a podcast guesting expert. You are a podcast hosting expert. And I love talking to people that are in the same niche, but serving in a completely different way. And so you built quite a nice business for yourself. But the first question I want to ask you is, when was your aha moment when you realized that hosting your own podcast and guiding experts to create theirs would be your sweet spot in business?
Okay, so this started for me. I created my first podcast, the Business Creators Radio Show, at the end of 2012. It was actually a demo for a course I was teaching on how to build your site using WordPress. And I thought, maybe I'll get into this podcasting thing I keep hearing about. So the demo was to set up the website for www.businesscreatorsradioshow.com. And then I let it sit for about 8 months. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, I have the engine basically built. So let's just get started with it. I did some episodes. I got into the groove. We've now done, I think, somewhere over 650. It's one of the longest continuously running entrepreneurial podcasts on the air today. I first felt the real power of it in 2014 when I booked Larry Winget as one of my guests, and it took me about 10 minutes to do. And that revealed to me one of the first secrets of hosting your own podcast is it opens doors to conversations you may otherwise reach. So let me turn this over to you for a second, Nancy. Now, I know you're an extremely generous person, so you may or may not give the standard answer. But let's say somebody you have heard of or casually have connected with on social media messages you one day and says, hey, is there any chance we could hop on a Zoom and I could pick your brain for 20 minutes? What's your response to that going to be?
It's usually not very favorable.
Exactly, exactly. I imagine you handle it with a level of diplomatic grace that would make Klaus von Metternich envious. But for a lot of people, I know it actually sounds more like a Clubber Lang script. So, so what I discovered is that when you have a podcast, your opening line to anybody can be, "Hey, I have a podcast and we're looking for some great guests. Would you be interested?" You can say that to somebody you don't even know. I mean, publicity handed to you on a silver platter. Some people are going to say, "No, I don't do podcasts," or some might say, "I'm not doing. I'm That's not really of interest to me." But the majority are going to say, "Sure, put me in, coach." Oh, and what do you need? Or they'll say, "It sounds interesting. What kind of guests are you looking for?" So you get a much higher opportunity to speak with people. And the funny thing is, and I cover this, there's an article on my website. The title of it is Candidly, Host Your Podcast and Get Free Business Coaching. If you want to quote unquote pick somebody's brain, host them on your podcast. And you can actually ask substantially the same questions that you were going to ask them if you were going to hop on a Zoom with them real quick for 20 minutes. And chances are they'll spill their guts because the reason being, and that's why I'm willing to tell you anything you want to know from me today, is there's a reciprocity and there's a mutual benefit to it. So that was the first thing. The second was in 2016 when I had a woman schedule an appointment on my calendar. I'd never heard of her before. And she said, "I heard you on a podcast. I'm looking to expand my team for our startup. I'd like to speak with you about that." 2 conversations later, I closed the biggest deal for consulting that I had ever booked up until that time. It was so big, I had to bring in my coach to help me through it because I didn't know what I was doing. It's like, these are numbers that I wasn't accustomed to. And I still have that client 7.5 years later. And what's interesting is when she and I discuss it now, she says that she was referred to me by somebody. And I'm thinking, we didn't have any mutual connections at the time. I'm not sure who referred you. And you told me earlier you heard me on a podcast somewhere, but couldn't tell me whether it was my show or my appearance on somebody else's show. So what I think happened is she heard me on a show I guested on, and the host made a really strong pitch for you. Really got to speak with Adam. I think that was the referral. Now, speaking of her, there's another funny story, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. And she showed me something of the power to it. She's fairly well known in her industry, and she went to one of her major industries conferences here in Las Vegas a few years ago. She's also a podcast host. She's actually one of our clients in that realm. So I met her for dinner, and she said, "It's been weird. I'm at this event partially to promote the brand and partially to get some new consulting clients. And these people keep coming up to me saying, 'Oh, you're the one that hosts that podcast. I loved your episode on X.'" So instead of it being a conversation where, "Oh, so Nancy, what do you do?" Like that really matters. And I'll come back to that point in a second. It was more like they were approaching her, credentializing themselves as somebody that she should consider rather than her handing out a bunch of business cards hoping to make a couple connections and meet somebody for coffee. So it created a celebrity expert brand effect that raised her cachet and by implication her rates.
Very nice. Now, so let me jump in here.
Yeah.
So with my show, I like to reach up to experts who have expertise beyond the expertise that I own.
Right.
And I like to reach as high as possible.
Exactly.
Because I really enjoy having conversations with people whose books I've read, who I've only admired from afar. And when I get the opportunity to interview them, I can demonstrate how much good homework I've done on who they are and why they're cool to extract all of the juicy goodness that I can from each guest. Mm-hmm. And then what I notice is that when the microphone goes silent and we're in the green room afterwards, the guest feels so seen and so edified and so delighted by what just happened that it just naturally lends itself to a conversation around, "Gee, Nancy, thanks so much for a brilliant interview. You really showed that you know how to do the homework and engage the guest and do this, that, or the other. I have a few people I'd like to introduce to be a guest on your show. And you know what? I've got a show of my own. I think I'd like to have you on my show." So I've found that even though my show is not as not as regularly produced as yours have been over the years, because you've been at this a lot longer than I have. It's been a powerful vehicle to get me to move up the food chain in terms of who I get to talk to and the audiences that I get to reach. And because there's a lot of ego involved, I think, with getting on podcasts, everybody's star ends up shining a whole lot brighter because we got the opportunity to have these conversations.
Yeah. So let me that you're absolutely right about that. Let me continue here. So not long after I closed that deal, I then found myself ironically in a place where I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I was kind of dissatisfied with the business I'd create. I loved the clients that I had and the work that I was doing with them, but I didn't know what I wanted to brand as, what I wanted to market, and what I wanted to grow. And this kind of went on for about 3 years. But what I had in the meantime was the Business Creators Radio Show. For 3 years, weekly interviews. That was 52 touch points with the audience I maintained and 52 new conversations with prospective clients, alliance partners, etc. So I was able to use that to keep the lights on and test the waters in certain other things that I might not publicly add to my resume, but were interesting projects to be involved in. So it also gave me the opportunity to try a few different things and say, is this something I would really like to do? Is this really what my business is going to be? Well, let's get hands-on with the project and find out. And, well, there's some good stuff. Ironically, the journey where I used the podcast as my way to sort of keep the business alive while I figured out what it was going to be led me to podcasting itself. A couple of our clients came to us, the existing clients wanted to launch podcasts, so I learned by doing, and it was based on the formula we created for Dan Janelle's Write Your Book in a Flash podcast that we created what was originally called the Podcast Reach System and is now known as Launch Your Podcast Fast. Basically, it was using his show and the notes we took from the process of developing it as a guide. So when the bug hit in 2020, I just got a whole bunch of cigars and gourmet cat food and went and sat on the balcony and created the system. Originally, it was a course, and then at the beginning of 2021, we began a pilot program of podcast launches, and it's just kind of gone from there. We've done well over a score of them up until now. We have some other venues related to podcasting we're getting into currently.
Okay, well, that's great. We all have a winding road to how we land on the thing that we're destined to do. And I do think the pandemic gave a lot of us a good reason to pivot and recalibrate and find a new way to serve that would allow us to keep the lights on and the rent paid and all of that.
Yeah, I think I see that even post-pandemic is because I believe we're post-pandemic. We're now into endemic where COVID's just here. I mean, I know you've told me that you've done a couple battles with it. I've gone a couple rounds with it myself. It's just something we're going to live with for probably the rest of our lives. It's part of our existence now. So that's what we mean by from pandemic to endemic, because endemic just means it's there. It's part of life. And beyond any considerations of that, part of what people discovered during that really dark period in 2020, stretching into 2021, is to create our celebrity expert brands, to do networking, client attraction. We didn't necessarily have to lug ourselves to seminars 30 times a year to build our networks. We can accomplish a lot of that separately in our own homes. Right. So my original impetus, and this was my original, shall we say, hook for getting people interested in the system was, well, since the physical stage isn't there right now, we're going to build your virtual stage that you own. Right. And that was the original pitch to it. And a lot of people decided that was a great idea, and I think we're seeing a lot of it. So even with conferences and seminars being back to a degree, I think people are a lot more selective about which ones they physically attend. And even most of the ones that are physical conferences have the remote option. And I know one of my own clients does annual seminars, and he's added the remote option to it. And happily, he's more than doubled his registration numbers from folks who, and he's actually gotten feedback on this, have said, I love coming to your seminars, but I don't want to physically go there every single time. Thank you for making it possible for me to spend a weekend with you without having to leave my house. Amen. And I think with podcasting, Adam, we've had a lot of that too. Go ahead.
So Adam, what are some of the best results you've seen your clients welcome as a result of launching a podcast of their own?
All right, here are a few of them, just to go through this very briefly. One is one of our early clients used the podcast as a way to create a wedge into a market that she had not served up until then. She wanted to be involved in doing coaching and mentoring for fiction writers and memoirists. And while she had done much of this herself, she had been in several other businesses that hadn't really done that. So being able to establish herself as an authority in that niche and make connections and interview prospective clients and prospective partners was a way to sort of jump to the top. And that's actually one of the top reasons to launch a podcast. We had another who used it as the foundation to build his launch network for his artificial intelligence app to help people with self-coaching. We have another who uses an opportunity to connect himself to some of the leading luminaries in his industry. He himself is involved with sales, influence, neurolinguistic programming. So imagine you have that type of podcast, and among your first 10 guests are Chase Hughes, Dr. Richard Bandler, and Vanessa Van Edwards, who are some of the top people in that field. Having a podcast is a way to make those types of connections where otherwise you may never reach them. I could go on, but I think those are a good 3 to start with.
Oh, very good. So building your thought leadership, building your authority, achieving visibility, getting to talk to cooler kids that might be beyond your reach for wherever you are happen to be at this time. These are all some of the benefits of hosting a show. The reciprocity that you have to offer to hosts that are lucky enough to host you. These are all some of the benefits. But there are some entrepreneurs, even despite these benefits, that they hesitate for one reason or another to launch their podcast. How can they easily overcome their hesitation and take advantage of having a podcast of their own?
One of the things we run into with some of our prospects, and this sometimes even creeps up after they launch, is they're concerned that, is my message really compelling? Is there really any reason why I should do this when so many other people are out there? Who's going to listen to me? Well, the fact is, podcasting is what's known as meta marketing. It's about personality branding, networking, client attraction, celebrity expert branding. So focus on the third one. We have a client who, when she initially launched her show, she created 5 episodes for the launch, and she actually didn't like them. She had second thoughts about even putting those live. We had to mock up the entire thing and show her what it would look like. And then she said, oh yeah, these are pretty cool. I'm still not sure, but let's go ahead and launch. And then she started getting reviews and feedback on what she thought was actually the worst of the 5 episodes. And to summarize the feedback, I'll give you one phrase that I think encapsulates all of it as in the main is, listening to her speak for 10 minutes gave me more information about this than 3 hours of webinars that I've attended on the same subject.
Oh my goodness, that's such great feedback. I bet you she took that in very well.
Yeah, she still was kind of surprised by it, and it came to my attention because I started getting the alerts from her syndication networks, and I showed it to her. She said, really? So I think part of it is sometimes there might be a bit of being starstruck by it, or can I really be a star? Will somebody really want to listen to me, want to hear me? I think that's really the top thing. And when you combine that with the concern of there are so many others doing this, the market is so saturated, what makes me different? So if I may give just one analogy, Chuck Norris is a martial art, he started as a martial arts instructor, and he has created his own school of martial arts, which is really an amalgamation of 2 existing schools, along with some of his own tactics, such as his own variation on the roundhouse kick. There's really not a lot new under the sun as far as the study of martial arts with Chuck Norris's program. What makes it special is Chuck Norris's program.
Yes, I think who it is the host is the reason why a lot of people tune in.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a huge fan of Oprah Winfrey, and if her name is on the show, I'm going to be watching. I'm a huge
Of
fan of
course.
Michelle Obama. If she's up, if she's on the marquee, I'm going to be listening.
Yeah.
If you're Taylor Swift, well, you know what that's all about.
Oh, are we a Swiftie?
I'm not a Swiftie, but I just happened to be tuning into the news this morning, and she's got this thing going on with this football player, and the
Yeah.
news was reporting that 40% more women were in the stadium as a result of her alliance with this new person. So who we hang out with can be a favorable reflection that can have very favorable economic impacts on in all kinds of different directions.
I have a friend who's who's a Swiftie. Say no more. It is, I mean, there's something about that. And some people use the word cult. I don't think there's a cult there. I think what it is just more like a feeling of community, like
Mhm.
you're part of something. Because whether you like it, you hate it, or you're indifferent to it, Taylor Swift has a message, which the best way I understand it is just the travails of trying to find somebody to love and being repeatedly disappointed. Well, many people go through that. It's something a lot of people can relate to. And so what Taylor does, and this is another reason why you should podcast, is Taylor becomes the voice of people who have those feelings. They may be reticent to express those because of how what people may think of them if they themselves say it. But because Taylor says it or sings it, they can stand behind her and say, yep, that's how I feel. And
I
they can join her on a journey toward self-fulfillment.
Yes, I think we're all looking for a place where we can belong. And if
Yeah.
the conversations that are happening are conversations that are resonant with what we're dealing with and what we're trying to accomplish in life or work, then we'll tune in.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some mistakes that folks make when they start their podcast. And maybe one of them is they make it harder than it needs to be. But what are
Yeah.
some of the mistakes that hosts make when they launch their podcast? And are
But
there ways to avoid some of those mistakes?
one of the mistakes is rambling sometimes. I'm so introverted that they had to make a new category on the left-hand side of the spectrum just for me. But when I'm with my people, like I feel you're my people. And when it's something that I feel really, really strongly about, I can just go off and go on and on and on because I feel it right here. And when you have that feeling as a podcaster, that is irresistible joy. And sometimes you have to reel it in just an inch or two. Nobody's perfect, and we all have our things that we work on. So there's that. And if you want to do monologue podcasts, go right ahead. Get on with your bad self, because people are going to latch onto that when they have that same feeling. Another is, as you said, they get way bogged down in mechanics. I've heard stories of people who've put additions on their houses with soundproof insulation because they think they have to do that. There's a real quick story. I remember, again, going back to the pandemic, I was in a podcast support group and somebody posted, hey, I just got my Trump check, you know, the $1,200 checks. And I went and bought the Roadcaster system and this and this and this and this. Oh, the possibilities. I can't wait to do my podcast. Some guy just out of curiosity said, oh, what's your podcast going to be about? Can't wait to hear it. He said, I don't know.
Hmm.
So it's a focus on the mechanics rather than the message. And I have one quick thought on that is think about your favorite TV show. Go back to the pilot episode. Notice how much different the pilot is from the regular first season. Because even when they thought they had it nailed, there were a lot of things they found they could develop. The pilot was just to get picked up. Once it got picked up, the network got involved, and that resulted in some changes to make it more marketable. And so please launch your pilot and then allow your experience to inform your ongoing development.
That is such a good point. You know, I've talked to an awful lot of podcasters in the last several years, and so often the common refrain is, I hesitate to listen to my first show because I know that I duffed it. I know that I blew it. And at least I put my flag in the sand and I got started.
Yes.
And then once you get started, and you do the next episode and the next episode and the next episode, your confidence grows. Your own commitment to waving the flag for the revolution that you're fighting for
Yeah.
is stronger. Your courage is stronger because you can reach up to cooler kids to be guests on your show, and you feel like you are worthy of having a conversation with people like that. And then what do you know? People hear the show, they hear the guest, and then both guest and host get inquiries from their social media or in their inbox or on their telephone that say, I heard you on so-and-so's podcast and loved what you had to say. Will you come to my show and do the same thing?
Yeah.
Do you find that your clients have that experience?
That happens a lot. And what's also really cool is when you host somebody on your podcast, you have a much greater chance of getting on their podcast. For example, a friend of mine, Andy Grant, who's the host of a podcast called Real Men Feel. It's about men's issues. I wanted to be on that show because I had a message about what it means to truly be a man. Now, if I had just pitched him or had my agent pitch him, even if I tailored it to his show, he might look at it and say, this guy's a podcasting expert. He doesn't really fit. I'm not saying that might be Andy's necessarily his thought, but that might get in my way. However, I had him on my show first, and just a combination of our conversation during the interview and what happened in the green room, I was able to very quickly make that case, and I got that booking. It's actually one of my favorite off-topic episodes because we get to deal with the impact of trauma, generational cycles, regression type issues. And also we get into my thoughts on trypanophobia, which is the fear of hypodermic needles. So I love sharing that. I just love sharing that episode. It's off topic for me, but it's something that I do have a passion about. And I know that I got that booking because I interviewed him first.
You know, I do an awful lot of joint venture partnerships and alliances with complementary experts in my industry. And I often will ask to go first, to lend support to my partner, to demonstrate the full weight of my influence.
Yeah.
And then have them be gobsmacked and amazed that impact happened. And then when I follow up with them to do a debrief about how it went, usually they say, well, this was great. What can I do for you? You know, so it's been a really nice strategy to meet some, you know, mover and shaker people and create a magic carpet upon which we all can travel to the next height of awesomeness.
Yeah.
So there are some mistakes that people make. They don't start. They focus on the tech instead of the message.
Yeah.
They might delay getting started because they're trying to be perfect. They might not have talked themselves into doing it right, so they never get started, which means, of course, they miss out on all the visibility and the authority and the relationships and all the or something better outcomes that can come their way.
Sure.
So there are some podcasts that get started and keep growing, and then there are some that get started and fade out. And then there's this concept that you've coined, podcast purgatory.
Yes.
What is that? Why do we need to know about it? And how do we get out of it?
Okay, purgatory, for those who believe in heaven and hell and purgatory, that's the place in the middle where you're kind of in abeyance. You haven't quite done good enough to get into heaven. You haven't done bad enough to go into hell. So it can still kind of go either way. Not to get religious here or anything, but I'm just using that as an analogy a lot of people understand. So podcasts fall into purgatory when they were launched without really a clear understanding of what the goals were as far as networking, client attraction, celebrity expert branding. What were the monetization goals? What is the connection between that show and the host's own intersection of their brilliance and their passions and to make them want to keep going? And when that happens, sometimes you just need to reassess. And as we discussed, you can treat podcasts as seasons, as an ongoing development type thing, and you can make changes along the way. You can always revive a podcast. Maybe you did it on some basic third-party platform. You're just not getting the traction. You can always build the other stuff and enhance it. It's like adding an addition to your house. I know somebody, I'm not going to give any details on this, but I remember she was going to do a podcast launch. She had all these super 7D graphics made and did a whole big marketing splash about it, even came up with a pseudonym that rhymed with the name of the show for herself. And she had her first 5 guests, and for her market niche, I mean, it was like having a podcast on neurolinguistic programming and getting Dr. Richard Bandler as one of your guests. That's how high level her guest was. She launched those first 5 episodes and we never saw the 6th one. I asked her about it and she said, well, I wasn't quite sure what the point was. It's because I think she went into it with the idea of I get to hang out with really cool people, but hadn't developed it beyond that. So I get to meet all these great people. Now what? And that part hadn't been answered.
So what do you say? That's a really good jumping off point. This is a person who thought she'd meet lots of cool kids, but sometimes in life and in everything that we do, it's like if we could start with the end in mind and build it with that idea, we could probably get to the yellow brick road to Oz. Mm-hmm. We'd probably get to Oz a lot faster.
Yes.
So having worked with scores and scores of people who have started podcasts and got hired you to help them launch them, knowing what you've learned from people who have succeeded and people who have faded and people who are stuck in purgatory, do certain ideas come to mind about things that hosts should consider as they consider the end in mind before they get started?
It's like achieving any goal, in my personal opinion. You start with the end in goal, or you start with the end goal in mind, and vision yourself having already achieved it. Then you go back and you create your story of how did I do it? And that's the piece in the middle that I think, when it's not there, causes people in their podcasts to fall into that podcast purgatory. And as I said, the way out is to simply evolve, adapt, overcome.
Okay. Now you have this REACH system, and REACH is an acronym, REACH. Can you quickly spell out what each of those letters means so that we can appreciate the thoughtfulness of this system?
Yep, I'm going to give you the fast version. The R has 3 meanings: represent, reinvent, and reverberate your business and brand. By creating your own media outlet, it allows you to take charge of the conversation. The E stands for engage. You're engaging prospects, clients, customers, business allies. The A stands for achieve. Achieve greater presence, celebrity expert branding, and make a difference. The C has 2 meanings: close more deals and create the business and lifestyle you deserve. And the H has 2 meanings as well: harmonize with your market. As you host the show, as you have interactions with your guests, your listeners, your fans, your followers, create that harmonization, and also become the hunted, not the hunter. And just by real quick analogy, if you're the hunter, you're the person who is messaging people saying, hey, can I pick your brain? Can we hop on a Zoom for 10 minutes real quick? When you're the hunted, people are banging down your door saying, what would it take for me to be on your podcast? I would love to be on your show. That just means so much to me. How do I do it? What are you looking for? and then that translates into your business prospecting. Instead of hitting people up, persuading them to take up on your offer, it becomes more of, I would love to become one of your clients. How do I become worthy of you? And that sometimes takes a while to develop. But as I say to folks all the time, if you are at point A and you want to get to point B, what is the first thing you can do right now? Take a step toward point B.
Yes. And so for everyone who's listening today or watching today, and they're thinking, is now the time to start my podcast? And is there help available to help me get on the path so I can run for the roses like a winner right out of the gate? You have a way to help people navigate that path to brilliant outcomes. So
yeah,
what is the next best thing for people to do so that they can belly up to the Adam Hommey bar and make sure that they are brilliant hosts right out of the gate?
Well, I largely don't drink alcohol, so you're going to get a lot of iced tea there, but I have different varieties and blends and about enough variations of hot tea to keep you going for a year. That being said, once you're at that bar, what we have is what's known as Launch Your Podcast Fast. And it is our system where we create for you a media portal in the form of a dedicated website that syndicates out to all those networks that you want to be on, you want people to follow you on. The idea is you use the dedicated podcast to create your brand that becomes your portal for your networking, client attraction, celebrity expert branding. Now, I know we're near the end of our time, so I could go on and on about how this enables you to have conversations with your direct competitors, conversations with people who are loyal to your direct competitors, form alliances with complementary service providers, interview the people who you see as being your potential clients, interview the people who can introduce you to people who you've really been dying to meet. I could go on and on and on about just those 4 examples of what it can do for you. Now, as a member of Launch Your Podcast Fast, in one sentence, I can describe it as you'll meet with me a couple times where I will get you to basically spill your guts about everything that drives you to want to create your podcast and what you're going to get for it. So in other words, filling in that gap between the results and the steps to be there, creating that story. And beyond that, you'll meet with me a few times and approve some stuff along the way. Oh, and you'll have to record a few episodes, but that's the fun part. Yeah, so instead of worrying so much about, well, does the website have this and how do I get on Spotify? Well, that's done. You don't worry about that. You create your episodes.
That's the done for you piece of it. You're going to handle that back end stuff so they can focus on being a great host and focus on procuring or curating their very great guests, but they won't have to worry so much about the back end, which is really magic or music to a lot of people's ears. So is it that, should they reach out to you by email, or what is your favorite way for people to get in touch if they say, yes, it's time for me to launch my podcast fast? Adam, set me up. What should they do?
Would it be okay? I'm going to ask your permission on this. Would it be okay if we set up a portal just for you?
Sure.
Can we do that so that the friends of Nancy Juetten have their special pathway in?
Yeah, that sounds great.
I figured you would probably be reluctantly willing to go along with that. So if you're listening to this show, and this is so that I know that Nancy Juetten sent you and you're a friend of Nancy, go to www.thereachsystem.com/Nancy. And since you're the first Nancy, you get to use the first name. So www.thereachsystem.com/Nancy.
Outstanding. So if you are listening or watching and you want to start your own podcast fast, Adam will handle all the back end. So all you have to do is be brilliant at the microphone and curate the most amazing guests to let your star and your celebrity brand amplify.
Yeah.
So that's thereachsystem.com/Nancy. Run, don't walk. Tell all of your friends. Adam, is there something I should have asked you that I didn't ask you that you would like to add now before we close?
Thank you for that opening, because I was really struggling to curb my enthusiasm there. I want to leave your listeners, regardless of how close they feel on a scale of 1 to 10 or closeness to or distance from launching your podcast now, I'm going to speak directly to your audience if that's okay. And I'm going to tell you what you want to do. I want you to take out a piece of paper if you prefer to write, or open up a Word document if you prefer to type, whatever it is. I want you to make a list of 20 people, whether they be the clients you're dying to have, the deals you would like to make that could change your business and your life, and who you would make those deals with, celebrities you want to connect to, whether they're actual celebrities or celebrities within your niche, those folks you see around on social media all the time who seem so hard to get a hold of. Just write those down. And then I want you to picture yourself having a conversation with them, getting to know them, becoming friends with them, and what that could mean for your present and your future. Do that, and that, I believe, will help you make your decision how close you are to launching your podcast fast.
That was a mic drop moment. Yeah. I love that. So Adam Hommey, thank you so much for being a guest on my Learn More, Earn More show. If you are listening or watching and gain value from this, please post a comment. If you are listening or watching and are not yet a subscriber to my channel, please subscribe. And then you'll always be first to hear the next episode with the next amazing guest who has value to add to your own Learn More, Earn More journey. This is Nancy Juetten, the podcast guesting success expert and the creator of the Love Your Business, Love Your Life Inner Circle. It's been my pleasure to have you with us today. Adam, you're a rock star, and thank you for tuning in. We will see you next time for the next amazing Learn More, Earn More show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.